Now, friends, we're going to play you an old breakdown, the kind that you can just roll up the rug, move back the chairs, and turn on. You know, one of the old deep in the heart of Texas tunes. Here it is. Let's go, boys, a breakdown.
All right, Bob Wills, the king of Western swing. If you don't know who Bob Wills is, from the mid-1930s to about the mid-1940s, he was about as big a star as you could imagine. He and his band, the Texas Playboys, were the preeminent voice in the genre of Western swing, which, if you're not familiar, was this really, really amazing confluence at that time of, hillbilly music from the South and from the West. There was some big band influence from the East Coast, as well as a really heavy blues kind of rhythmic influence as well. And they all came together to form this awesome genre of Western swing that would be a direct and huge influence on rock and roll that would come a couple decades later, and thus, all the popular music that's come after that. So what kind of guitar is the biggest superstar from the 1930s and 40s going to play? Well, he's the king of Western swing, so why not the king of flat tops, the Mardon D-45. The Dreadnought now, as we know, is an iconic design. It has its roots actually all the way back to around 1915, but Mardon in earnest started making them in 1931. At first they had the D1 and the D2, which would then evolve into the D18 and the D28 respectively. The D45 didn't actually come around until 1933, and it came about at the request of a young man, a young singing cowboy, up and coming at the time. His name was Gene Autry. Now, Gene had come up listening to guys like Jimmie Rodgers and watching him on TV. He had a 1927 0045, name inlaid on the fretboard, super, super fancy. It was like the ultimate kind of hillbilly bling machine. Gene saw things like that growing up. He had a couple of hits out on the radio at this time and thought he should have something similar, but go even bigger. So he reached out to Mardon and he said, hey, I want your biggest, newest flat top model, which at the time was the Dreadnought, and I want to deck it out in as much pearl as you can fit on it. And so thus was born the D45. So Gene's initial D45 was a 12 fret model and also had a slotted headstock rather than the solid. But from 1933 to the end of the run of the D45 in 1942, it remained the most opulent, ostentatious status symbol that you could get as an entertainer, especially at a time when most of the country was struggling to feed their families. I mean, it was the height of the Great Depression. And due to that, over the course of 9 years, that original production run, there were only 91 of these made, including Gene Autry's the first one. So one particular day in 1941, Bob Wills walked into his local music store in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he was from, and he bought a brand new D45, actually this D45. And since then, you can see it's been incredibly well taken care of, and I can truly say without bias that this is the finest D45 left in existence. Now, these D45s were most often sold to professional working musicians, often entertainers who used them really regularly, which was excellent. But at the same time, that meant that these particular guitars soon were in need of service and repair throughout the years. And the unfortunate truth about that is that repair ethics throughout the decades have not always been up to the standards that we currently hold today. So as a result, a ton of these D45s, unfortunately, were subjected to irreversible damage, in the name of repair, that have permanently altered the playability in some cases, but almost always the sound of them as well. So a lot of these actually had partial or full refinishes at some time in their lives. That was just kind of an artifact of it being an entertainer's guitar. It was on stage. You didn't want any wear or damage on it. It wasn't cool back then like it is now. And so once these guitars started to wear a little bit, oftentimes they would be sent out for refinishing. Now at that time, refinishing meant, stripping all the old finish off, which pretty much without exception meant significant thinning, sometimes catastrophic thinning of the top, the back, and the sides. And as you can imagine, once that goes, you can't put it back, and it takes very, very, very little removal of wood, especially on the top, to permanently alter, the sound of a guitar for the worse in many cases. Quite often through the years as well, it's been in vogue to play very, very heavy strings, and if that's left unchecked, it can cause permanent damage to the top, cross-grain breakage that even when it is repaired and it's done well, it permanently alters the sound of the guitar. So to find one of these untouched is a really, really special treat. Thankfully, this D45 has had the bare minimum work done to it. Basically things that all acoustic guitars will need at some point in their lives. It's had a neck reset done, it's had a new saddle to accommodate that neck set, and it's had a refret as well. Everything about this guitar is just right. The neck angle, the geometry. If I was to set this neck today, I would set it exactly where it is. It is just so perfect. I can truly say this is one of the healthiest pre-war Martin guitars I've ever seen. I can guarantee it'll be around for another 80 plus years for us to enjoy.
Wow. Has it had any work done to it?
Saddle, neck reset, frets.
Wild. I am Jason Verlinde, the publisher of the Fretboard Journal magazine here in Seattle, Washington. The Fretboard Journal is a quarterly magazine that, although it's based in Seattle, we have writers and contributors around the world, and we celebrate handmade guitars, vintage guitars, everything guitar culture related. So we just put out our 50th issue earlier this year, which was incredible. We did a great redesign. We're doing weekly videos, we have a whole family of podcasts, and we're really just celebrating great guitars as best we can, you know? That's kind of the name of the game. We started as a keepsake print magazine, now we're telling great guitar stories through all these different channels. So we just did our first ever Fretboard Summit gathering in Chicago at the Old Town School of Folk Music, and I'm driving home with 6 cases with amazing guitars, not quite this amazing, and I stop at some gas station and I see my Instagram feed that you have this guitar, and I immediately do what I never do, which is text you and go like, is that gonna be there for a little while? And here we are. So thank you, it's incredible. 91 examples, I believe, pre-war D-45s, something like that. I have been around cool guitars for a while, but not like you guys are. I mean, I have friends who have cool collections that they'll let me see. I've probably seen 5 or 10 of them. You know, usually the ones you see in museums are the adorned one where it's Ernest Tubbs, thanks, you know, all that stuff. This is just, this is how it left the factory, I believe. This is a powerhouse, it's cool. At our first Fretboard Summit that we held 7 years ago in California, David Crosby brought his 60s D-45, which is a legendary instrument, and let anyone play it. It's rare to see one of the original batch ones in the wild. This guitar is super light. This guitar doesn't look like it's been beat up, but it sounds like it's been played constantly, which is a really rare thing. You've seen guitars that are totally played to death and they sound fantastic, and you're like, well, that guitar really, you know, worked for it. This guitar looks like it never really had much pick wear or anything, which is kind of remarkable. But it still sounds totally broken in and well played. There's a list on Wikipedia, I was like, before I came over here, of every D-45 and the serial number. And it's hilarious because most of them are celebrity owned. Most of them have had some modifications, unlike this one. But a whole bunch of them, it just says known to exist. Like they're somewhere out there in the universe, but no one has a clue. And John Arnold saw it 20 years ago, and aside from that, no one really knows. It's like rare bird sightings or something. It's really cool. This is incredible.
Early pre-war, it's the unicorn. Last time I really got to handle one of these, went to go check one out in Arizona for a collector musician, which was so cool to, you know, really dig into one. A little bit neglected and stored over time, but so amazing, really an incredible experience. That deal didn't go through, not because of the guitar, but it was the weekend that COVID was kind of hitting. Everyone said, let's just see how things go, hold off for now. So to see one come in, you know, a few years later in this condition and be able to kind of compare those two, because I was taking mental notes the whole time, was pretty mind-blowing. This is a guitar that was owned by Bob Wills. Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys are a band and a figure that are echoed in these walls constantly. You hear about pieces that belong to Bob or his Texas Playboys or a friend of a friend, and absolute legend. So to get an artifact from him, but a 1941 D-45, it's pretty incredible. I mean, it's definitely a landmark in my, you know, guitar career, if you will. Mark Tossman did the only work to it 25 or so years ago, and that was a neck reset, frets, and saddle. The bare minimum, just what you have to do to a Martin of this age. No overspray, no cracks, bridge plates, all good. I mean, it's an anomaly. On top of that, being that clean, I was so surprised of how this guitar sounded. Usually when they sound this good, they're like a tattered war flag, you know, they show all the scars. Somebody's put a lot of love, a lot of, you know, work into that instrument. They're played, they're dragged around God knows where. This guitar, Bob obviously treasured and respected. It's definitely that old school mindset of take care of your belongings, you know, and a little bit of player's wear, but I mean, it's crazy. So one of my clients that I work with told me that he needed to add a D-45 to the collection. So that was sounded like a fun but challenging task. So I started with calling Mark Tossman, who is a very close friend of mine, known him since I was super young, and he is the authority on vintage Martins. If you have $1 million Martin you'd worked on, he's the guy to do it. He's the best to ever do it, in my opinion. So he was my first call and kind of always is. So after talking to Mark, we knew a collection that had this instrument, but it was one that was most likely being kept in the collection. It's, you know, what started as a large collection, the guy kind of sold off stuff over the last 10, 20 years, but this was his baby, prized possession, you know, and although it was a long shot, things lined up and made it happen. So sent Mark out there immediately to go grab the guitar, and nothing holds up to when you open the case to something like this. Truly one of the most amazing instruments, if not the most, I've ever had the honor of handling, having, hosting. It's, you know, ghosts kind of came out of the case. It was a wild experience. You talk a lot about these, you see a lot about them, you compare a lot of things to them, you even see a few, but this specific example just floored us. It still does. Holding this, I'm just like kind of savoring the last moments before this goes home. This is something that I'll be talking about till I'm an old guy, you know? I'm so lucky to be able to have a quick moment with something like this, such an important part of history. Couldn't be happier for the new owner. He set his sights high, but we were able to do it, make some magic happen, and he's gonna be a wonderful caretaker for this instrument for the next however many years. It's the king of all dreadnoughts, the D-45, and I mean, 1941, that's pretty much all you can ask for. So clearly I'm excited about this, but I'm gonna wrap it up, hand it over to Nick Mardon to show you guys what it sounds like before we fly it to its new owner.
Cool.
Timing, that's hilarious.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.